Many actions and institutions are attributed to Numa. In some of them, Plutarch thought he detected a Laconian influence, attributing the connection to the Sabina culture of Numa, for Numa was descended of the Sabines, who declare themselves to be a colony of the Lacedaemonians. One of Numa's first acts was the construction of a temple of Janus as an indicator of peace and war. The temple was constructed at the foot of the Argiletum, a road in the city. After securing peace with Rome's neighbors, the doors of the temples were shut and remained so for the duration of Numa's reign, a unique case in Roman history. Another creation attributed to Numa was the cult of Terminus, a god of boundaries. Through this rite, which involved sacrifices at private properties, boundaries, and landmarks, Numa reportedly sought to instill in Romans the respect of lawful property and nonviolent relationships with neighbors. The cult of Terminus, preached Numa, involved absence of violence and murder. The god was a testament to justice and a keeper of peace. In a somehow comparable, more moral rather than legal fashion, Numa sought to associate himself with one of the roles of Vegoia in the religious system of the neighboring Etruscans, by deciding to set the official boundaries of the territory of Rome, which Romulus had never wanted, presumably with the same concern of preserving peace. Recognizing the paramount importance of the ancili, King Numa had 11 matching shields made, so perfect that no one, even Numa, could distinguish the original from the copies. These shields were the ancilia, the sacred shields of Jupiter, which were carried each year in a procession by the Salii priests. Numa also established the office and duties of Pontifex Maximus and instituted Plutarch's version the Flamen of Quirinus, in honor of Romulus, in addition to those of Jupiter and Mars that already existed. Numa also brought the Vestal Virgins to Rome from Alba Longa. Plutarch adds that they were then at the number of 2, were later augmented to 4 by Servius Tullius, and stayed thus through the ages. Livy and Dionysius give a largely concordant picture of the vast founding work carried out by Numa concerning Roman religion and religious institutions. Livy begins with the priesthoods which Numa established. Numa created a residentiary flamen to Jupiter endowed with regal insignia, who could carry out the sacred functions of the royal office, which Numa usually discharged. Numa did so to avoid the neglect of the rites whenever the king went to war, for he saw the warlike attitude of the Romans. He also created the Flamines of Mars and Quirinus, as well as the Vestal Virgins and the 12th Salii of Mars Gradivus. Then, he chose Numa Marcius as pontiff. To him, he bestowed all the sacred ceremonies, his books, and seals. The following words of this passage have been considered a systematic summary exposition of Roman religion, with what victims, upon what days, and at what temples the sacred rites were to be performed, and from what funds the money was to be taken to defray the expenses. He also placed all other religious institutions, public and private, under the control of the decrees of the pontiff, to the end that there might be some authority to whom the people should come to ask advice, to prevent any confusion in the divine worship being caused by their neglecting the ceremonies of their own country, and adopting foreign ones. He further ordained that the same pontiff should instruct the people not only in the ceremonies connected with the heavenly deities, but also in the due performance of funeral solemnities, and how to appease the shades of the dead, and what prodigies sent by lightning or any other phenomenon were to be attended to and expiated. Livy lists the hostii, victims, as the first competence of the pontiffs. Following this come the days, temples, money, other sacred ceremonies, funerals, and prodigies. Livy continues saying Numa dedicated an altar to Jupiter Ilicius as the source of religious knowledge, and consulted the god by means of auguries as to what should be expiated. He instituted a yearly festival to Fides Faith and commanded the 3 major Flamines to be carried to her temple in an arched chariot and to perform the service with their hands wrapped up to the fingers, meaning Faith had to be sacred as in men's right hand, among many other rites he instituted, he dedicated places of the Argii. Dionysius of Halicarnassus devotes much more space to Numa's religious reforms. In his account, the institution of 8 priesthoods is attributed to Numa: Curryones, Flamines, Celeries, Augurs, Vestals, Salii, Fetials and Pontiffs. He says only a few words about the Curryones, who were in charge of tending the sacrifices of the Curii, the Flamines, the Tribuni Celorum, who were the bodyguard of the king but who also took part in some religious ceremonies, and the Augurs, who were in charge of official divination. Plutarch records some of these, such as sacrificing an uneven number of victims to the heavenly gods and an even number to the nether gods, the prohibition of making libations to the gods with wine made from the grapes of unpruned vines, the prohibition of sacrificing without flour, the necessity of making a complete turn on oneself while praying and worshipping the gods. The ritual of the spolia opima is ascribed to Numa, too, by ancient sources. Finally, Arnobius states the indigitamenta were attributed to him. Numa mostly preferred bloodless and not costly sacrifices. Plutarch, in like manner, tells of the early religion of the Romans, that it was imageless and spiritual. He says Numa forbade the Romans to represent the deity in the form either of man or of beast, nor was there among them formerly any image or statue of the divine being. During the first 170 years they built temples, indeed, and other sacred domes, but placed in them no figure of any kind, persuaded that it is impious to represent things divine by what is perishable, and that we can have no conception of God but by the understanding. By tradition, Numa promulgated a calendar reform, which divided the year into 12 months according to the lunar course, but adjusted to be in accordance with the solstitial revolution. It was during this time that the months of January and February were introduced. Numa also made the distinction of the days being either profane or sacred. Plutarch in his parallel lives mentioned that Numa Pompilius made January the first month in the calendar instead of March by the next reason: he wished in every case that martial influences should yield precedence to civil and political. For this Janus, in remote antiquity, whether he was a demigod or a king, was a patron of civil and social order, and is said to have lifted human life out of its bestial and savage state. For this reason he is represented with 2 faces, implying that he brought men's lives out of one sort and condition into another. Numa established the traditional occupational guilds of Rome, so, distinguishing the whole people by the several arts and trades, he formed the companies of musicians, goldsmiths, carpenters, dyers, shoemakers, skinners, braziers, and potters, and all other handicraftsmen he composed and reduced into a single company, appointing every one their proper courts, councils, and observances. Plutarch. William Blackstone says that Numa may be credited with originally inventing corporations. They were introduced, as Plutarch says, by Numa, who finding, upon his accession, the city torn to pieces by the 2 rival factions of Sabines and Romans, thought it a prudent and politic measure, to subdivide these 2 into many smaller ones, by instituting separate societies of every manual trade and profession. Numa was credited with dividing the immediate territory of Rome into pagi villages. According to Plutarch, he divided the existing land among indigent people in Rome, and persuaded them to work in agriculture, thinking it would reduce aggressivity, and eliminate poverty and consequently crime. He considered agriculture as an occupation that fostering character rather than wealth. Plutarch suggests, the forbidding by Numa of making a sacrifice without a meal and from unpruned vines was intended to make people work in agriculture. Numa forbade fathers to sell their sons into slavery if the son had married according to the will of the father. According to Plutarch, Numa permitted slaves to feast with their masters during the Saturnalia, for admitting to the enjoyment of the yearly fruits of the earth those who had helped to produce them. Plutarch suggests the timing could be in the memory of Saturnian age when there was neither slave nor master, but all were regarded as kinsmen and equals. Plutarch depicts Numa as a powerful peacemaker. Making the Romans more peaceful was one of his main targets from the beginning of the kingship, and many of his actions were directly or indirectly intended to achieve this aim. He succeeded so much that the situation was even better than described in the song, and on the iron-bound shield handles lie the tawny spider's webs. Rust now subdues the sharp-pointed spears and two-edged swords, no longer is the blast of brazen trumpets heard, nor are the eyelids robbed of delicious sleep. According to Plutarch, any conflicts were excluded not only from Rome but from all Italy. The roads became safe and feasts and festivals prevailed. Nobody tried to hurt Numa, to take his place. When Numa died, from natural causes, people friendly to Rome come from many places to honor him. Plutarch put this in contrast to the policies and the destiny of his predecessors and successors, Romulus, who is depicted as war king, and the 5 kings after him, from which 4 were killed and 1 dethroned and expelled from Rome. The Christian philosopher Clement of Alexandria in his book Stromata claimed that King Numa Pompilius was influenced by Mosaic law, and due to this refrained from making human images in sculpture. Modern scholars do not accept this claim, as there were no known contacts between the early kings of Rome and the ancient Hebrews. Numa Pompilius continued to be remembered well into the later centuries of the Eastern Roman Empire. Composing novelli constitutions, 6th century Emperor Justinian I recalled Numa alongside Romulus as 2 of the Roman state's founders, with Numa being the one who first organized and enhanced the city of Rome, by means of laws. In a similar manner, the Coptic Monophysite Bishop John of Nicaea likened Empress Theodora, consort of Justinian, to 4 prominent figures of Roman history: Romulus, Numa, Caesar, Augustus, citing her reforms aimed at eradicating prostitution. In the 11th century, Michael Sellos wrote his Chronographia with an intent to provide pedagogical models for his student, Emperor Michael Seventucas, and when reviewing the 7 kings of Rome he lauded Numa as pious, peaceable, and a man not only well worth seeing for his physical appearance but also equipped with all sorts of mental virtues, and a lover of all wisdom.